network considerations. So what we see here is this is the type of peers that we're looking through and the methodology that we reach a consensus. So we've got two different types of peer here, or two different types of system. First, we've got the peer. And this may look like two different peers, but they are really the same peer, but you decide, do I just want a committing peer that's just submitting in transactions? Or do I want that peer to be an endorsing peer so it can validate, did you follow the rules? Did you follow the smart contract? So this is what the peers have. And then we have the ordering service. So we'll have a set of ordering nodes that will probably be clustered in one location that will then be able to run these transactions and verify which ones should be in each batch. They do nothing really more than that. They can't read or use the transactions from that point of view. So let's step through how we submit a transaction and how this will then become a block on the chain. So we start off with an application that's going to submit in a transaction. We then have, each node will have an endorsement policy. And what an endorsement policy does is it starts defining who can do what and who's able to endorse a specific transaction. So for example, if I'm trying to change the color of a car, the endorsement policy will say for the smart contract that I'm using that I have to use three different endorsers to say that this transaction was a good transaction. And this can vary by which smart contract you're using, but it also see that we've got different peers on the network here that are not part of that endorsement policy. So we've sent it to all of those endorsers who are within policy, and then each of these endorsers then execute that transaction. So by execution, I mean that they're running the transaction against the smart contract, checking things like that I, as a user, am allowed to do this transaction, that this transaction follows the rules in the smart contract. It will then verify that that was a good transaction by sending back the original transaction along with a signature. And that signature will say that that was a good transaction. And it also gives the read and the write set to say, this is what I've read from the database and this is what I'm writing to it. So what this client can do is check that those read-write sets are matching so that it gets a deterministic result. It can throw it out optionally at that stage if it wants to. But if it doesn't, it will be thrown out at a later stage. It just goes through more processing to get to that throw out stage. So once that transaction has been verified by each of the endorsers, then the transaction is submitted to the ordering service. And this ordering service is receiving many other transactions from many other applications doing the same process as we're going through. So it will group these up into a bunch of transactions within each block. And what it then does is distribute out to all of those peers what is going to be in the next block. Once it's distributed out, each peer can then send it on to the other peers in the network, but mostly it's sent out to all the peers in the network. And then each one of these then verifies that those transactions were correct. And in doing so, they'll validate that the next block should be added into the chain, and then they will then send out to the world that this block has been added, and the original application will receive a little notification to say your transaction has been added into the block. So we see here we've got the 7-step process on how we go through the consensus methodology. And where we saw before that we've got different methodologies of Solo or Kafka and Zookeeper, that's what's taking place within this ordering service here. And that's how it orders the transactions that are coming through. What we'll then see on this side of things is that the consensus considerations is really built around the same way that you build a business network that we see today. So what we have is you might have different endorsers within each business, and each business will then define, do I want to be an endorser or do I not? So a manufacturer for a car and a dealership for a car may be endorsing for a color change, but someone who isn't part of this, a different manufacturer, may not have to endorse such a transaction. So that's the process that we go through on that side.